I was having some thoughts this morning about the psychological, or some of the psychological dynamics of Brexit, and not not the political elements of it so much as the psychology of it, because it reminded me very much of the infant separating out from mother. And as any decent developmental psychologist will know, or object relations theorist, or whatever, the Margaret Marler, who wrote this wonderful book called The Psychological Birth of the Infant, detailing the different stages of development as the infant is weaned from the breast, from the mother, and essentially from a kind of enveloping symbiotic bond with the mother, where the infant doesn't know anything different, where uh, the perceptions have not been differentiated enough, and so on. Well, when it comes between the ages of 18 and 24 months, which I found interesting in relation to Brexit, we have a transition period. Then we come across the terrible twos, and the terrible twos are a time that Margaret Marler calls the individuation separation stage. And it's a time when perceptions are becoming clearer, first words are becoming noticeable, and the infant needs to break through a barrier of dependence. Obviously, not complete dependence. This comes in various stages, usually every 7.5 years, as a kind of forming of a more independent individual identity. We can see this in astrology with the squares of Saturn, as it's called, the 7.5 year cycle, squares its own place and so on. But I don't want to confuse this video too much with astrological cycles. But this separation out of the infant into a phase of autonomy and separateness is decidedly important for the development of the infant in later life, because what it's about is being able to stand on one's own, to be able to stand the knocks of life and the anxieties of life and the difficulties. If one is an independent being, separate from a guardian, such as a parent, one needs to learn how to do that. Otherwise, one remains a dependent. And I'm thinking here of the great, somehow there seems to be a parallel here. And that if this phase of separation from a greater mother, in this case the European Union, which seems to have a greater and greater involvement with a central authority that is bureaucratic and not particularly well defined, but acts as a kind of guardian, or not so much as a father, although a father is there, but a mother, suggesting that if we stay all together in a big conglomerate, then this is somehow progress. And I'm not so sure that it is progress. I think in the long run, maybe in about 200, 300, maybe even 400 years, there'll be a global government. But at the moment, seems to be the force of that is run by economics or a political agenda of security and safety, somehow that, you know, going on the principle that, under the guise that we're all equal, but as we know, some people are more equal than others. And in certain quarters, this more a communal sense, while this is absolutely needed for many people, and for some people it would be a progressive move forward, those that have individuated, those countries, societies, that have an identity and have a notion of who they are, supported by a history of independent being and progress. To those, that seems to be a problem, to be somehow connected together again with a conglomerate in which the individualized qualities of any particular identity are superordinated. They're overcome and overwhelmed by this conglomerate mass. And so I think this is what might be happening in the country, is that in people's individual psychologies, is that some people want to move to a place of greater safety and belonging. In astrology, you would call that a very Cancerian element. But England is a Capricornian country with an Aries ascendant, very independent nation, used to somehow progressing or finding pioneering ways of moving forward, and I think this is why this is a great tension in people, because there's the ideology or the move towards a matriarchal system of incorporation, and where you have a kind of a central matriarch who says, as long as you stay in this kind of closed circle, we'll be safe, we'll be okay. But in individuation, in that individuation separation stage, if that's not marked, if it's not clear, or if it's fudged in some way later on in life, that problem will rear its ugly head in the form of a neurosis, in the form of dependency, or maybe even in the form of an addiction, where a person hasn't gone out in life and faced the difficulties of it, the existential anxieties that exist in trying to make your way or make one's way in the world. And more than that, make one's way as an individual, to not become immersed in the crowd. That can be very nice at a football match, or when we all see, the sportsman on television, or when we're in a kind of group that has a sense of group identity. That's where one can lose oneself in a kind of state in which you have a greater sense of belonging. But that ultimately is a danger to the individual, and a danger to the individual's development, which has an innate pattern of developing whatever one's is as an individual. Of course, this is all very Jungian, but I just wanted to detail what I think may be going on, and this great fear that's arising around about the terrible twos, the transition state, which a state of individual development where autonomy wants and demands to come forward. And as I said, I think ultimately, maybe in 200 or 300 years, the one world government may be inevitable. I mean, we are living in what is called the network society at the moment, where people can speak to the world as long as they have access to the internet or mobile phones. It's an incredible progressive movement. But this interconnected sense can lose oneself in this in a communal hive, as it were. And of course, there is the principle of an authority, or a central structure, in which people can take all the power, and as long as you obey all of that, you won't get punished. It's a very tyrannical, a hidden tyrannical force, I think, behind this centralization. I frankly don't know which is best. I don't know whether going out on a limb on behalf of nations is the right thing to do. But on the other hand, I know it will lead to progress and development through struggle and difficulty. On the other hand, the other way is to become, as I say, enmeshed or lost in a sea of a lack of national identities and borders, which will have a tendency to regress back and have far less development. At least for the individuals concerned in each country which meshes, and but for conglomerates who rule at the top, then that may be far easier for them, or exactly what they want, to manipulate this insecurity of people so that they get their own way.